so long since I felt your skin. It's been so long since I listened in to one of your shells and the song of your sea. Princess of the ocean, won't you come with me? Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Take my hand.
Hello and welcome to the Nature Garden Podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the Weekending Show team from Lionheart Radio. It's a chance to take a wander down the garden path and country lane with the birds and the bees and the flowers and trees, and an opportunity to hear stories from the past and the present. In this episode, from William Turner to modern day herbalism, Tom Pattinson's Going Herby. Tom Cadwallender's here with part 2 of his handy guide How to Identify Birds, and today he'll be concentrating on sparrows. Plus, Jack Hills from Holy Island, Northumberland talks to us about an exciting new project. He's starting to create a nature pond. All coming up on the Nature Garden Podcast.
Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline.
Herbs are such a useful group of plants that can be used in so many ways. Gardener Tom Pattinson's here to explain all about herbs and to tell us a little bit about some of the sages of herbalism.
What exactly is a herb, I'm often asked. Well, my mind immediately springs to the concise Oxford Dictionary interpretation, which suggests a plant which the stem is not woody or persistent and it dies down after flowering. That neatly describes a herbaceous border perennial, and that fits, of course. I like the bit where it says a plant which leaves, etc. are used for food, medicine, scent, flavour. Now that's what immediately springs to mind as a herb, and we've always had a herb garden just outside the kitchen door. Pop out, pick a sprig of something, add it to a meal. Brilliant. There's another aspect to herbs I love, and that's the history behind them. The early apothecaries, the herbalists, the barber surgeons who used them to help people. And they recorded, thankfully, most of their work in document form and in books which still persist today. The one that springs to mind of their three key herbalists from the past is William Turner from Morpeth, who became known as the father of English botany. He was born about 1508, 1510, early part of the 16th century. He studied at Cambridge, lived in London, grew herbs, went abroad to Europe, travelling, discovering things about herbs, and all his work came to fruition in his best-known work, The New Herbal, which came in three parts between 1550 and 1570, something about there, the middle part of the 16th century. He chose to write it in English, the vernacular language, rather than Latin, and he wanted the knowledge of those herbs for medical use, etc., to become widely known throughout the country. And indeed they were. The father of English botany, William Turner. There's a garden at Carlisle Park in Morpeth. When it's open, look in there, and the garden is dedicated to him. There's some information there about him. The second person that springs to mind is John Gerard. He's born about the middle of the 16th century, and he went to London also as an apprentice barber surgeon, and after 7 years or so he was given permission to establish his own practice. And while studying in London, he had a garden, of course. He grew many herbs in, and eventually he had contact with people from Europe as well, and eventually he produced something called the Herbal, and it had everything in about herbs you'd want to know at the time, possibly even now. There were several chapters in this book, and he mentioned the common names, botanical names, description of habitat, time of flowering, the virtues, and so it goes on. He famously wrote, non est semper fide habenda fronte, which interpreted means appearances are not always to be trusted. And of course, he was dead right, wasn't he? Some herbs or some plants of that nature have a poisonous element. The third person has to be mentioned is Nicholas Culpeper. He comes a bit later in the 17th century, and you could say that he benefits from everything that has gone before him, but what a person he was. He just lived for 37 years. He studied, practiced in London. He wrote his book, The Complete Herbal, of which I have a copy on the bookshelf at home. Not the original, I might add. That would be something, wouldn't it? A first edition. It's widely known, this book, and it mentions most of the properties of herbs, how they can help cure you, etc. Fascinating. I dip into it every now and again. He was alive at the time of the English Civil War, and he became a surgeon as well as a botanist, a herbalist, and he actually was there as a surgeon at the Battle of Newbury. And he took a bullet during that time, and he didn't die at the time, but about a year later, he died from TB, sadly, tuberculosis. But three famous names there from the past, which you look them up, Google them, and it adds a bit more to your understanding of herbs. Now, and if someone said to me, well, who's the person to talk to about herbs, or where can I get the best herbs? Now, currently, in 2020, I'd have to say Jekka McVicker, who is in Bristol area. She has a herb farm and she has so many varieties. She exhibits at Chelsea when it's on, Chelsea Flower Show. Her stand is a dream. She is at her stand in attendance, and she's been growing herbs for 30 years. And if you want to find out a little bit more about Jekka McVicker, you can go online at jekkas.com. Jekkas.com, that is all lowercase, small JEKKAS.com. Grow a few herbs. It's exciting.
If you're like me and struggle to identify birds, well, our very own birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology is giving us some tips on how to narrow things down a bit and to help us identify birds. Here's part 2 of his really useful guide.
Back to bird ID. Bird ID, identifying birds can seem incredibly daunting at the very outset because there's all these similar looking species and just mind-blowing at times. But really, it's a process of detective work and elimination. And so what you do is you try to get these things in your head and you work on them so they are you do them subconsciously. So it's a process of elimination. You do it subconsciously. You think about the number of species that regularly occur in this country. There's about 620 species on the British list. Now that list includes all of the rare birds and one or two of the species which have now gone extinct. The rare birds include things which have only turned up once or twice and are unlikely to turn up again or with any sort of regularity. Just to give you an example, I go out bird watching almost every day, and I find perhaps 2 to 3, perhaps 4 scarce species on my local patch a year, and I'm out every day. So you're not really going to find them. The laws of probability suggest that you ain't going to find a rare bird. So you learn the common ones first, and it's that process of elimination. So we've got about 620 species on the British list. Of those, about 240 to 250 are regularly occurring, and 200 of those regularly breed. So if you're going out in the winter time, you can sort of eliminate quite a significant number just by virtue of the time of year you're going out. Similarly, in the breeding season, you're cutting the list down to sort of 200 and 200 species straight away, and that's kind of almost manageable. Then You think about the various habitats that you're going into. So woodland species, for example, compared to the coastal species. You go in there and you're not going to find things like wading birds in a forest. You're not going to find auks or other seabirds in a forest. So straight away, you're reducing that number to something a bit more manageable. And so seasonality is really quite helpful in terms of summer and winter. Also is the type of habitat you're going into. If you're going to a lake, you're going to find lots of ducks, potentially waders, but you're not going to find the songbirds, generally speaking. So you're eliminating all of those at the same time. So when you're going out, you're kind of making that sort of selection or elimination through that process in your head, and it's quite helpful to get that in your brain. And you go to the seashore, you're going to find wading birds, you're going to find gulls, you're going to find perhaps sea ducks. You're generally not going to find the woodland species. And you go to woodlands, you're going to find blackbirds, robins, and that sort of thing. You're not going to find those other species, the seabird species. So straight away, you're going to have all that list reduced to a number of birds which you can easily handle in your head. And once you've learned, say, 40 or 50 species, and you'll know some of them anyway because there'll be birds you're very familiar with. There'll be robins and blackbirds and that sort of thing. It just helps in that process of elimination.
At the risk of sounding like a traditional folk song, Tom Pattinson's been looking into growing some traditional Herby favourites.
I've never been to Scarborough Fair, but I do know about parsley, sage, rosemary and thyme. They're 4 herbs that I grow in the garden along with others. They're attractive. Most of the herbs are, so it's a bit of a double whammy. You enjoy their presence and you enjoy adding bits and pieces to certain meals. Parsley, if you're going to cultivate it, think hard about sowing it in the garden first. Because it can take up to 6 weeks, depending on the weather, to germinate outside in a drill in the garden. Apparently, it goes down to meet the devil for 5 weeks, grows tired of the devil's company, and comes up to see us with a smile on its face in week 6. I've experienced this before, so I don't sow it into a drill outdoors. I sow it into a little modular tray with little cells in. First of all, I get an egg cup, put some tepid water in, open the packet of seed and empty the contents into that water in the egg cup. I let it stand overnight on the kitchen windowsill. Next morning, I get a plant label. I fill a tray with cell tray with compost, and I use the plant label to eke out a few seeds of parsley to each little cell in the tray. After about a fortnight, it will germinate, not 6 weeks, a fortnight, 2 weeks. This year, I always put a date on the label when I'm sowing seeds. This year, it took 10 days to germinate. That's quite extraordinary, but it works. That's a little bit of warmth in a propagator or in the airing cupboard or somewhere in the house where it's quite warm. So, parsley can last you for a whole year in the garden. I grow the curly leaf type, which is tough, stands up to frost. Planted out now, we're already taking little leaves from it. We just got rid of last year's parsley plants a few weeks ago, so it almost lasts a year in the garden. Sage, beautiful sage plants, some with grey leaves, purple leaves, and so it goes on, different varieties. Nice flowers come on them, of course, if you allow a few to flower. But you can take stem cuttings of those leaves. Simple stem cuttings. In the summer, of course, but any other time of year that there's soft enough growth, I've rooted them. Rosemary. Rosemary is always here in the garden. At the moment, it is a mass of blue flowers. I grow the variety Jessop's Upright. That's JESSOP''S, Jessop's Upright. And it is just spot on. We have 2 or 3 of them near a pathway in the garden planted, and as I walk past them, I grab a branch. They're quite tough. with my hand and let it run through my hand and sniff all the way around the garden afterwards, that beautiful fragrance of rosemary leaves. It's flowering now, but it also can flower in February. It flowers sometimes in October, November. Quite amazing how these little bursts of blue flowers come out, and attractive plant. Stem cuttings, softwood stem cuttings, very simple way of rooting it. I keep reproducing them in that way. Time. Who could be without time? Plenty of time in this garden at the moment, pun intended. If you go around and take stem cuttings of that in July, August into early September, then of course they will root for you. They're beautiful varieties. There's the golden thyme, lemon thyme, citrus scented thyme, and etc. Just beautiful. I grow other herbs here. Borage. I haven't bought a packet of borage for 10 or 15 years. This is let me describe the plant. It grows to about 2.5 feet tall, something like, that's 75 centimetres, something like that. Roughish leaves, largish leaves. But if you rub those leaves and you take a sniff, your finger and thumb, afterwards, strong smell of cucumber. I'm not sure why, but I just love that. Also, it's the flowers, though. The flowers, they're beautiful, or about the size of, let's say, a 5-penny piece, maybe a bit bigger than that. And they have blue petals and black stamens that were used in medieval tapestries, depictions of them. And apparently, when a crusader was going off to the Holy Land, the stirrup cup, before he left, had those floating on the surface, the idea being borage for courage. Indeed, they're still used in drinks today. Beautiful sight. It sells seeds all over the garden. As I say, it's probably 10 or 15 years before we bought a packet of seed. We're never without it. The other one that is persistent, but beautifully persistent, is the chives. They grow in groups, bulbous, and just dig a group of bulbs up in the autumn, as you would when you're planting or flowering bulbs, narcissi, etc. Dig them up, divide them up, and you grow on from there. They sell seed all over the place, but we're continually using chives around the garden. Go to a shop, have a look around the herbs, a gardening shop, and get one or two, introduce them. Where you're going to put them? Well, close to the kitchen, of course. Sunny position if you can, in a raised bed, or they'll even grow in a window box. At one stage, I judged a group of them in a flower show locally, growing in hanging baskets, and the winner had such a selection in a large hanging basket, I grant you, and they were standing on a pot in a hanging basket with 10 different varieties of herbs. That was the winner.
Sparrows are common visitors to many of our gardens, despite some falls in numbers, but you might, like me, need a bit of helping knowing your house buggy from your tree or hedge variety. Over to you, Tom Cadwallender.
Some of the commonest birds we get in our gardens are sparrows. Now, sparrows have gone through quite a checkered history. They used to be so common. It was classic that we'd see flocks of them in our city centres. These are house sparrows, by the way, and those flocks have largely gone. But now they kind of retreated back to some heartlands, and we do see them in quite big flocks, but not the way they were. But they do come into our gardens quite readily, and they're found right across the world, mainly because they've been introduced by kind of settlers. You'll find them in the extreme parts of the world. I've been down to Punta Arenas in southern Chile, and I've seen them down there as well. But they've been introduced, and in North America they were known as Churchill sparrows because they were introduced by the colonizers. But the fact that they were British sparrows, as they were thought, or English sparrows, they were nicknamed Churchill sparrows. But anyway, the house sparrow is still quite a common bird, quite a ubiquitous bird, and we'll find them right across our gardens. And the way we identify them, the males are different to the females. The males are quite sort of splendid chaps, and both sexes are about 5 to 6 inches in size. The males have grey underparts, but they got a grey cap as well. But they have grey cheeks, but they have this super black bib which runs right down onto its upper breast. Brown back, as I've mentioned, and a little white wing stripe. But look at the bill shape. The bill shape is conal, so that tells me it's an seed eater. So that's kind of helpful in terms of identification. But if you look at the female is so nondescript. It's hard to sort of pin it down. But the female is grey, completely grey underneath and around the face, and has a brown back with a little white wing stripe. But it hasn't any sort of real other markings on it. The other sparrow that we get in any sort of numbers in this part of the world is tree sparrow. And tree sparrow generally across the country has gone down through a massive decline. But in Northumberland, we're kind of bucking the trend, really. And they're kind of holding up. They're colonial nesters because both sparrow species are related to the weaver finches of Africa. And they're all colonial nesters, and they like to be in colonies, and they like to chatter, and they're quite noisy. Both species of these sparrows are quite noisy. Anyway, back to the tree sparrow. The tree sparrow is slightly smaller than the house sparrow, but it has a nice sort of reddy brown cap to it, white cheeks, and they're quite distinctive, these white cheeks, and a little the tiniest black bib just underneath the bill. But these white cheeks are really stand out, as I've mentioned. But it has a little dark patch on the cheek, and that really stands out as well. And that gives kind of a clue to the identity of the bird. If you see that little white cheek with that black patch in it, you've got a tree sparrow. And of course, the tree sparrow has a little white flash, as the house sparrow does. It sounds quite tricky to sort them out, but actually they're quite easy to sort them once you get your eye in on there. The other species that has got a sparrow name, and it's the hedge sparrow. It used to be called the hedge sparrow, and we now know as the dunnock. Dunnock is a very, very common bird, very grey and brown, stripy bird, but it's got a fine bill, which tells me it's an insectivorous bird. And it's not really a true sparrow. It's an accenter, but it feeds on insects, not like the seeds of the house sparrow feeds on, for example. So they're quite easy to tell apart, certainly because of the bill shape and the way they behave. So there's the 3 common species which we'll see in our garden quite readily. The dunnock, or the hedge sparrow as it was known, is found in right across all sorts of habitats. But remember, it's got the thin pointed insectivorous bill, not like the conal bill of the house sparrow and tree sparrows. So hopefully that will be help you sort it out when you're looking at your garden birds in the future.
This is the Nature Garden Podcast.
And now for something close to my heart, but something I've never got round to doing. Well, not yet. Making a pond. Well, one of my neighbours, Jack Hills, has been inspiring me. Here's how Jack is going about creating a nature pond in his garden.
Hi, I'm Jack. I am the vicar's son, so I'm currently in the vicarage garden. Obviously, during this time, it is quarantine, it's corona, so there's nothing much to do. And Mum's been doing a lot of gardening, so I thought, why not make a pond? I've kind of always wanted a pond, but never had the space or the time to make one, so it's kind of perfect to do it now. So my kind of idea is to make some big pond, perfect for wildlife. So I'm going to start off by clearing up the whole area, moving some plants, getting rid of some plants, the weeds, the smaller stuff, and building my first layer. And then slowly build each tier, kind of like a upside down jelly mould kind of thing. And slowly but surely, this can take some time because it's going to be quite big and the ground is quite rocky. So it's going to be a lot of removing rocks, cutting roots, that kind of thing. And then putting some sand down in the bottom, some underlay and some overline, so the actual pond liner with tiers. and fill it with water, obviously, with a filter, solar filter, because running a wires can be quite difficult. And then once it's been filtered for about a week, I'll add in plants. So I want some deep water plants, some lilies that float to the top, some oxygenating plants like mare's tail. Also, I'll get some marginal plants, use some of the ones that are already here, but some other flowering ones that I can hide the filter with, and put some driftwood pieces in, some nice big rocks, so it's quite interesting for both the fish, which I'll finally put in there, and to look at. One of the driftwood pieces was already in the garden, but when I was walking the dogs, I saw a nice one down by the castle beach, so I thought, let's go grab that. So me and Dad went and got that one day. So that'll be quite nice for wildlife to stand on as well, because it'll be poking out the top, and put some planks of wood going into the pond so mice and stuff like that can drink and safely get out again. What I want to create basically is just a nice area for wildlife to grow. Obviously, hopefully the frogs will come. We're going to get some tadpoles in, which would be quite nice next spring. But it's just always something that I've loved, and water and everything, so it's quite exciting really. Get some fish in there and everything. Probably just goldfish, not koi. But yeah, it's exciting times.
Magic stuff that. Thanks, Jack, and we'll get an update soon on how he's progressing. According to figures out this week from the Met Office, the UK has experienced its sunniest spring since records began in 1929, and it looks like it'll be the driest May on record for some parts of the UK. I have a feeling what just might be part of Tom's mantra this week?
It's job for the week time. And the first thing to mention is this continuing drought. We've had no significant rainfall for ages now, and I have to confess I could not leave the bedding plants any longer for the containers or planting out into the garden, into the border. I've had to plant them out, and I've had to plant the vegetables out as well, of course, and the result is I have to support them with water. I have the hose out every other day at least, giving them water, otherwise they'd just die, and I'm not having that. So I'm watering and keep on watering until something really significant falls from the heavens and relieves us of the job. One of the casualties of the drought we noticed last week was a dwarf lilac, which we had for 10 or 15 years. Full bloom, beautiful, pink mauve flowers and highly fragrant, just standing about 5 feet tall, and it's a really good dwarf, and the leaves suddenly flopped. So we went in there, and a circle, didn't go too deeply, about 10 centimetres deep, maybe 15, 6 inches deep, circle around the plant, took the soil out, put some weathered horse manure in, soaked it, put soil on top, soaked that, and we're still watering it, and hopefully it will respond. It didn't respond within 2 days. That's a bit early really to see if what we've really done has any effect. So we decided we're going for a second step, and I've tried this before and it works with some shrubs. After you've soaked the roots like that, reduce some of the growth. 4 feet those flowers, 4 feet for some of the stems. So we took about something like a foot, 30 centimetres of growth from this dwarf lilac, reducing the burden it has to bear. And I'm hoping, as most shrubs, sometimes they lose their leaves in drought, a state of stress, but they'll regain, send new shoots out and leaves, buds later. So we're hoping that that works. So those two were, I'm afraid, victims of this drought. We are keeping an eye on it. The wind is another thing. It's not just the sun that bakes the soil hard and gets rid of the moisture, makes it evaporate and leaves plants in that state. The wind dries out the soil as well. The wind does two things, and that 3 days of wind over last weekend, it destroys some plants, shreds them, flattens them, and it also dries the land. So it's played a contributory factor as well. One plant that I didn't like to see going down, we have a beautiful blue comfrey, It's Symphytum is the botanical name, Symphytum caucasicum. And the bees were loving it. Beautiful blue flowers. And it grows up to about something like about 3 feet tall, a metre tall, something like that. And it was beautiful. Next day, during that wind, got up in the morning, it was flattened, horizontal with the soil. I've seen this before, and like most plants which are flattened in that way, you can chop right down the soil level, and it will respond, grow, and flower again, but a little later in the year. But the bees were still on the flowers, so I couldn't do it. So I've left it until the bees decide they've got what they can from the flowers, and then I'll chop it and look for regrowth. I'm looking also at the pest situation at the moment. The aphids are on the march. Plants outside, we've got some rose bushes outside, and they're way ahead of themselves. You can generally expect the first and best flush display of roses the last week in June. Well, I've got some really big buds on Chandos Beauty and Rose Olivia Austin, or Olivia Rose Austin. Just beautiful, and they're coming up so well. Big buds. I think that we're going to have some flowers out way before the last week in June this year. Things are ahead of themselves, but I also noticed 1 or 2 little aphids on them as well. Now, various ways of dealing with aphids. If you believe in spraying pesticides, willy-nilly, get on with it. But there is another way. If you've got some gloves on, you can just rub them out with your finger and thumb. Another way is to get some soapy water, and soap was used as a pesticide long before these serious pesticides came on the scene. Soapy water, it irritates them. They don't like it, so it'll keep them under control to an extent. Anyway, keep an eye out for them and other pests. I note quite a few vine weevils on the march as well at the moment, and they're a nuisance. That's the beetles. Also at the moment, I'm looking at the birds extremely with great anxiety. They haven't got moisture. They're searching for food, of course, in the baked earth. They're making a bit of a mess in the vegetable plot, but I forgive them for that. And you must get water out for them. We have the bird bath, and the blackbirds especially. It's like a whale. They flap those wings about, and we've got 2 bird baths, one at the front, one at the back of the garden. We're replacing the water at least twice a day, sometimes 3. My heart sinks when the blackbirds go, because they flap the water all over the garden. Well, they're watering the garden as well, of course. So look after the birds. They need it for a drink, and they need it for bathing. Those are your jobs for the week, folks.
You've been listening to gardener Tom Pattinson, birder Tom Cadwallender, and Jack Hills from Holy Island. I'm Carl Steinson, and do check us out and send us a message if you want to get in touch on Twitter at Gardeners Radio and at Tom Cadwallender. And look out for the website allthews.naturegardennotebook.com. Wishing you a great week. Bye for now.